Welcome back to Core Anesthesia. Whether you are a student prepping for tests and boards or a CRNA here to earn CEUs, we are glad you've joined us. For more about us, make sure to check us out on Instagram at Core Anesthesia and online at coreanesthesia.com.
Welcome back to another episode of the Core Anesthesia Market Update, proudly sponsored by locumtenants.com. And we are super excited today because we're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff regarding some geographical locations and how that can affect your job process. In a world where every patient is unique, it's no surprise that the challenges of delivering care can vary greatly depending on location. So in today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into a recent report by MGMA and locumtenants.com that explores the state of healthcare operations across rural, suburban, and urban settings in a post-pandemic world and how it can affect CRNA job options. Today, we have Carol Coe, Associate Vice President of the Anesthesia team at locumtenants.com, to give her perspective on this report. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Brittany.
Hi, it's super exciting to have you here. This is your first podcast.
Since hopefully not my last.
No, you're going to do great. You're going to do great. So let's dive in. So the healthcare industry is really facing a lot of hurdles right now, as we all know. Staffing shortages and the constant influx of new technologies just keep the practice leaders around the country, healthcare systems, kind of keeps them up at night and really, is something that is weighing on their mind. Locumtenants.com and MGMA recently teamed up to do a report on comparing rural versus urban care delivery challenges. A key takeaway from this report is that many organizations are still kind of clinging to that traditional staffing approach that really isn't cutting it anymore. So the good news here is there's a silver lining. This report highlights the potential for innovative solutions tailored to specific geographic settings and how facilities can attract CRNAs to certain areas of work. So before we dive into all the data and the stats, Carol, can you give me kind of a overview of our industry and how recruiting CRNAs in rural areas differs from recruiting in metro areas?
I'd love to. Okay, first I'll start by saying that the industry has been so demand heavy for so many years. But the one thing that remains constant is that the demand of the industry does not discriminate between rural and metro areas. For the longest time, practices in rural areas and populated areas equally have widespread demand. I'd say that the ways the recruiting efforts differ could be broken down into three areas. The first one is what we call geographic desirability. Because rural areas often lack what we call geographic desirability, they tend to offer more appealing packages that include higher rates, maybe better lodging stipends. Usually that's to offset the lack of lifestyle offerings. That could be recreational opportunities, commercial amenities such as dining and shopping. I had one CRNA who told me, if the town doesn't have a Costco within 50 miles, I don't want to go there. So that used to be her measuring stick.
Gotta love Costco.
So that's the first area. The second area I would say is the cases. Rural assignments tend to have a wider range of cases, and CRNAs in rural areas tend to do more procedures like blocks, regionals, Soviet epidurals. The rural areas tend to offer also more ortho cases. So a lot of the CRNAs that I work with from the western half of the country always did OB. And when they wanted to change and work in a big city, they tend to not use those skills. On the flip side of that, we would have CRNAs who worked in metro areas that did not have a chance to do that. They would specifically seek out jobs in rural areas just so they could keep up those skills. So that's the second. The third, I would say, is the acceptance of shorter availability. For most of these needs, they are long-term. They could be a year, if not more. And so you'll find that in metro areas, the assignments there, their goal is to have continuity of care. So they want one person for a 6-month stretch instead of a revolving door. And they can do that. They can get that because these jobs in metro areas are closer to airports, the interstate. Jobs in rural areas maybe don't have an airport nearby within an hour or two away. And in order to get there, you have to go through several different state routes. So you'll find that the jobs in rural areas really allow for 1 to 2 week stints, and they'll cobble together a 6-month period with maybe 3 or 4 people. So if you are someone who is only wanting to do 1 to 2 weeks at a time instead of a 6-month assignment, then you'll find that rural jobs are probably the easier way to do it.
Yeah. And as a locums agency, this is something that we're considering when we're recruiting, for certain areas, and how can we attract people to those specific rural areas. So, okay. So now let's talk a little bit about staffing. And Carol, you touched a little bit on those things just a second ago, but CRNAs, NPs, PAs, those are all critical roles to fill the gaps that this physician and clinician shortage that we have. In fact, the report that we did with MGMA predicts a whopping 38% growth in APP jobs by 2032. And guess what? We surveyed those healthcare leaders, and they overwhelmingly said that CRNAs are a key player in their future, managing less complex cases, handling routine visits, and even extending clinic hours. But here's where things get interesting. The challenges of staffing vary depending on location. So let's take a look at those different locations. Urban settings have their own set of concerns. While staffing and financial sustainability are at the top of their list, leaders also face some unique challenges like patient access, clinical support staff, and even facility upgrades. But on the plus side, according to the report, urban healthcare leaders view the geographical desirability, like you talked about, Carol, of their practices much higher than leaders in other areas. In the suburban areas, those healthcare leaders seem to be battling with health IT infrastructures and security more than their rural and urban counterparts. High quality of life and competitive salaries and flexible schedules stood out as a suburban healthcare leader's most positive trait in their recruitment and retention efforts. Then in the rural area, rural healthcare leaders can point to strong work-life balance, lower cost of living, and community amenities as recruiting tools. Urban leaders benefit from geographical desirability and strong professional development opportunities. So these are all the things that Carol was just talking about. The key takeaway is recognizing these unique challenges and opportunities across certain locations is crucial for developing effective strategies to deliver high-quality care. So, Carol, would you agree with that? I know you kind of talked a little bit about that, but I think that's something that's very interesting to zone in on.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. I mean, once a facility identifies the best that their community has to offer, that's going to resonate with someone. I'll never forget, one CRNA told me, the happier the clinician, the higher the quality of care. And that has been a measuring stick for me since I heard that maybe 8
I love that.
You have people who worked in their job for 20 years. They lived in a highly populated major urban area for their whole career. But those are the people that will hear something in a job posting in the middle of nowhere, USA, that says fishing all weekend or less traffic, no traffic. You can get to work without having to stop at a red light. You'll see things like that. And those are the things that resonate with people. So that's number one. Number two, every now and then I'll see a list of the happiest places to live on MSN or Yahoo since I started this job, that's where I started to pay attention to the cities on this list. And a lot of times, though, several of my cities where I've recruited ended up on that list. And what I did with it, I took that became my next tag. That became the next subject of my mass email. It became the next piece that I put in my job post. So yes, I would definitely agree with that.
Okay. And what do you think are the future prospects for CRNAs in rural, suburban, and urban areas?
I really think at this moment, it could not be brighter. Year after year, I started this in 2005. And every year I would think, oh my gosh, it's never going to get better with this. The ride's over. This is it. And then I'd start to panic because the people that are working with me now, they still need a job. And then they know and love us and they'll recruit their friends. And so we've got to find jobs for them as well. And I'm thinking, I can't let anybody down. I've got to keep the people working who want to keep working. And so year after year, I would have that panic attack. But I realized after about year 17 that it's all in vain. Like every year, it just keeps getting better. And to the CRNA who is on the fence about taking a job in rural America, I would say hands down, it is worth the risk. Only because I've got this feedback from the folks who work for me, not just the folks that work with me, but the folks who work with my colleagues as well. We've worked with so many anesthetists who reluctantly took a job in the middle of nowhere, USA, but it turned out to be the best experience of their career. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but we have so many CRNAs who have worked so long in their current position and they just want to slow down. They don't want to work 12-hour shifts anymore. They just want 7 to 3 with a 30-minute lunch break and they just want to go home. They don't want to deal with any politics. They just want to give good anesthesia and go home. And so many of them who maybe did this during their vacation weeks, they all have permanent jobs, but maybe they did this during their vacation weeks. They come back and they say it gives them so much perspective on it. I also think that it's wonderful to see CRNAs have such a dominant place in the patient care landscape because 20 years ago, that was not the case. When I first started, there were only 9 compact states, and now there are 23. There might even been more than that since the last time I researched it. But I believe and I hope that this will only continue, if nothing else, for the betterment of patient care.
So we talked a little bit earlier about technology and things like that, and rural and suburban healthcare practices are less likely to explore AI tools and other new technology compared to the urban practices. However, rural practices show the most interest in remote patient monitoring. So with that said, how can rural practice leaders make the case for physicians to ditch the city and come work in rural areas? A recent MedCity News article highlighted 5 reasons for candidates to consider moving to rural environments. And you kind of touched on some of these already, but their top 5 were cleaner air and healthier environments, lower stress levels, natural outdoor spaces with physical activities, things like better fitness, also improving sleep quality from less light and noise pollution, as well as access to fresh farm foods and other organic things. So this is definitely something that people consider. Like, these are the things that people consider when they're taking a job for sure. And so, Carol, do you see these reasons, or do you hear these reasons popping up when you're talking to CRNAs when they're looking for a job?
I definitely see these reasons over and over again. I think the most recent one I saw was green space, green life, or something like that. So we often see several categories. The 2 main target groups that I see that appeal to the reasons that you just mentioned, like clean air, the lower stress levels, and everything. I'd say that they could be broken down maybe into 2 groups. I think I mentioned earlier the group that's worked full career and just wants to slow it down. But there are also clinicians who are ready to start a family, and they don't want to raise a family in the city. They want to have parks on every block. They want to be able to walk to school. So you have that group. And then you have new grads. A lot of new grads these days are mainly looking for metropolitan areas. But I think with the help of the marketing that you find in MedCity News in that article, I think they're probably targeting that group to move out of the city. So yeah, I definitely see those in job postings to be out.
It definitely sounds like there's like a generational factor there. Where you are in life depends on where you kind of want to live. And so that's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Core Anesthesia Market Update, sponsored by locumtenens.com. And thank you to Carol for joining us today. If you found this discussion helpful, be sure to follow locumtenens.com on social media for more information. For CRNAs interested in locum tenens work, explore our website, locumtenens.com, to discover an array of opportunities available. If you want to earn more money, try new practice settings, expand your clinical skills, and control your own schedule, give locums a try. Locumtenens.com will assist you with licensing, credentialing, and privileging. Whether you choose a local assignment or head across country to maybe a rural area, we will cover your travel and even cover your malpractice insurance. So check out locumtenens.com to search for opportunities today. That's all for this episode of the Core Anesthesia Market Update, sponsored by locumtenens.com. Thanks for listening.